Hello and welcome to Lunchtime Politics, reaching you live from our global headquarters here in the nation's commercial nerve center, Lagos. I'm Jeffrey Uzama. Coming up on the program, it's another judgment day at the Supreme Court as it affirms the victory of governors of Delta, Ogun, Nasarawa, Gombe, Kebbi, and Kaduna State after dismissing appeals of the petitioners. Former Central Bank Governor Godwin Emefiele pleads not guilty to amended 20-count charge preferred against him by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission over procurement fraud allegations. And the national chairman of the Labour Party, Mr. Julius Abure, refused claim of his purported arrest. Thanks again for joining us. Let's begin with the proceedings at the Supreme Court, where we can tell you that the governors of Delta State, Sheriff Oborowore, his Ogun State counterpart, Dakwa Abiodun, Governor Abdullahi Sule of Nasarawa State, Inuwa Yahya of Gombe State, as well as Nasser Idris of Kebbi State, and including Uba Sani of Kaduna State, can now shelve any form of anxiety over their positions following the Apex Court's dismissal of appeals by some of their opponents in last year's general elections. The Supreme Court dismissed all three appeals for lack of merit and affirmed the governor of Delta State, Governor Oborowore Sheriff of the PDP. The three political parties, namely APC, SDP, and Labour Party, and the candidates are all contesting the declaration of Sheriff Oborowore as the elected governor of Delta State. In a unanimous judgment, the five-man panel dismissed the appeals and awarded no cost. Also, the court has also dismissed the appeal filed by Mr. Ladi Adebutu of the PDP challenging the victory of Governor Dakwa Abiodun of Ogun State. The appeal of the PDP governorship candidate for Ogun State, Mr. Adebutu, contends that the election of Governor Abiodun did not comply with electoral laws. He also claims that Governor Abiodun did not score the lawful majority votes and asks the court to void his election. The Apex Court, however, dismissed the appeal for lack of merit. For the Nasarawa State governorship election disputes, the Supreme Court dismissed the appeal of the PDP governorship candidate for Nasarawa State, Mr. David Ombugado, for lack of merit. The judgment was a unanimous one and no cost was awarded. On October the 2nd, the Election Petition Tribunal in Lafayette nullified the governor's victory, that's Governor Abdullahi Sule's victory, and declared David Ombugado as winner of the poll over issues of votes deduction, but that decision was reversed by the appellate court. Dissatisfied, the PDP candidate approached the Apex Court, which has now agreed with the Court of Appeal and subsequently dismissed the case. And that's not all. The Supreme Court has also dismissed the appeal of the PDP candidate in Gombe State, Mr. Jibrin Barde, challenging the election of Governor Inuwa Yahya of Gombe State. It was a unanimous judgment, as the court says the appeal lacks merit and it was unnecessary. The Tribunal and Court of Appeal had upheld the election of Governor Inuwa Yahya. And more from the Supreme Court this time. This is just coming in moments ago. The Supreme Court also dismissed the appeal filed by the PDP governorship candidate in Kaduna State, Mr. Isa Shiru, challenging the election of Governor Uba Sani. The Apex Court also affirms the judgment of the lower courts, that's the Tribunal and the Court of Appeal, which affirmed the election of the governor of the state, that's Governor Uba Sani. The Supreme Court has also dismissed the appeal of the PDP candidate in the Kebbi State governorship election, challenging the governor of Kebbi State, Mr. Nasser Idris. These are some of the judgments that have been coming in from the Supreme Court today. There were 6 cases. There were 6 cases up for decision by the Supreme Court. Eventually, those cases have now been decided, and the governors of those states can now sit still and face their job as far as this is concerned. So those are big decisions coming out from the Supreme Court. We just have to keep tracking as we're just coming on air. Some of these stories were breaking. So, so those 6 governors can now relax and face their responsibilities as chief executives of those states. And so more states will be decided because the timeline is getting closer before it becomes status bar. So the Supreme Court apparently is trying to get all of this done before the timeline. But we're going to be joined on the program by a senior advocate of Nigeria who is going to be giving us perspective on this judgment that just came in before we take all the stories. We're joined via Zoom by legal practitioner, Mr. Kayode Akinshola. Mr. Akinshola, thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me. A beautiful afternoon to us there.
Mr. Akinshola, a lot is happening in quick succession. We're just trying to catch our breath to just follow up on the decision. Some were just coming in just a few moments before we came on air. So I'm sure you're also following. I don't know which one stands out for you, which is where naturally I like to start with my guests when it comes to judgments from the Supreme Court. Which stands out for you and why?
Now, for me, I believe that almost all of them actually stand out when you look at them. And Supreme Court has actually taken cue from the outcome of the Court of Appeal. We must not forget that the election petition matters, being sui generis. I mean, to prove it when you get to the election tribunals, is not something that is that easy. Even if the respondent at the trial court, that is the tribunal, is unable to substantiate, you who is the petitioner, you have to prove your case on a standalone basis. And that is the reason why you notice, if you observe from Delta to Kaduna to Kebbi to Gombe to Nasarawa to Ogun State, all of these are the outcome of the Supreme Court. They are actually following what has been decided by either the Court of Appeal or as well as the tribunal. They've been following suit. Because for you to say they should upturn a particular election, you have to prove every detail. If you are saying that there were irregularities, non-compliance with the Electoral Act, you really have to prove it, show it at the tribunal. You don't just dump. Because the Ogun State, for example, has actually been decided. I think I can speak to a large extent because it is one of those that I took, that I witnessed at the tribunal level. I was actually in the tribunal. I saw what happened there. What was done majorly at the tribunal level is what we call dumping. You don't just bring documents, like thousands of documents to a tribunal and bring in maybe 15 or 20 witnesses to come and speak to some of those documents. You wouldn't expect the tribunal to begin to fish for evidence or look for somebody that will talk to each of those exhibits that were presented. But for me, I want to say good luck to some of these governors. A number of them, they've been panicking. Some of them they don't really know their fate until now. But by now, we want to believe that they will really get stabilized and they start governance properly in their respective states.
Since you highlighted the issue of Ogun State, maybe let me also bring one of the things the PDP candidate raised, which is Adebutu. He was making claims to the fact that the margin of lead between him and the governor is less than the potential vote that will be cast for places that elections were cancelled where elections should be. Maybe there should be a rerun. Do you think he doesn't have a case in that area?
Now, if you are going to do that, you have to do that at the level of evidence. You don't come back during your final address to say, these were supposed to be done. If you are going to do your mathematical calculation, same must be done, shown to the tribunal. Highlight it. Because by the time you get to Court of Appeal, little can they do by the evaluation of their evidence. And by the time you get to Court of Appeal, they are going to adopt some of those evidences that were placed before the tribunal. It's only if you have some evidences that were wrongly admitted by the tribunal, that is when we can actually have issues. But for the allegation of crime, because these were part of the ground of the appeal, if you are alleging crime, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. It behoves, and the pendulum of that particular role or duty on the petitioner doesn't change. You have to prove it to letter. If you are alleging crime, you have to prove it beyond every reasonable doubt. So for me, I want to agree with Supreme Court because to a large extent, you have to start your work from home. Then you get to Court of Appeal. But I believe that the councils that actually represented Honorable Adebutu, they have done a very good job. Because election petition matters is not something that regular lawyers do. If you are supposed to file a particular document within 7 days, it has to be done. If you file it within 14 days, it has to be done. But I've seen the appeals that were filed across board. But I can say that all of them were actually lucid. But Supreme Court, in its magnanimity, except if we are having instances where there are constitutional infractions, the panel that sat today, they are 5-man panel. The full panel of Supreme Court is 7. If there are things that Honorable Adebutu has seen that, okay, if we can still question some of these things, maybe the Honorable Chief Judge of the Federation can actually call for a full panel, or maybe they are going to do a review of what was actually done. But for me, Supreme Court, I've not seen the full detail or the full judgment, but I think the decision of the Supreme Court, from what has actually come out, I think it was actually sound in terms of judgment.
I don't know what you will say to the judgment from coming out from the tribunal in the case of Nasarawa State, for instance. The Governor Abdullahi Sule can now heave a sigh of relief because the Supreme Court now agrees with the appellate court, the Court of Appeal, that yes, they were right in their decision. But the tribunal has said that, according to the presentation by the PDP candidate, that votes were deducted from the PDP and added to that of the APC, which is the premise for their decision. So what do you think that the Supreme Court looked at and said, okay, by the decision of the appeal court, I don't think we agree with what the tribunal did?
Now, you see, what Supreme Court is going to do is to adopt whatever thing that is coming from Court of Appeal. I mean, in terms of judgment, the outcome. If you are having instances where votes were deducted at the level of tribunal, you must know that there's going to be maybe cancellation, irregularities that were placed before the tribunal. If that is done, or maybe during the counting of the votes or at the level of tribunal, if that is deducted and you are having instances that is added to the other, I expect that at the level of tribunal, the counsel to the PDP in Nasarawa ought to have done some of these things. They do their housekeeping briefs before they get to Court of Appeal. Don't forget, Supreme Court, as well as all these players, they have 180 days within which they have to do some of this things. So they are supposed not to be any error. And in case they notice any infraction, it is expected of them to challenge it at the level of Court of Appeal. They are going to do a very, very thorough job at the level of Court of Appeal before it gets to Supreme Court. For me, I have no reason to doubt that particular decision of the Supreme Court, for dismissing the PDP appeal in the case of Nasarawa.
I know that you had mentioned in your opener that the Supreme Court seemed to agree a lot with the decision of the Court of Appeal in literally all of the cases that we saw today. But last week we saw a different, it was a variation, where the tribunal, as well as the Court of Appeal, in the Kanu case, had agreed and said, look, this Governor Abba Yusuf should not be the governor for 2 basic reasons. One, they were challenging the fact that there were votes, ballot papers that were not stamped on, which were counted. They did the deduction and gave it to the APC candidate. And of course, the issue of the name of the NNPC governorship candidate, who is now the governor, not being on the register. I don't know, juxtaposing your position with what happened now as against what happened last week, I wonder what your reaction will be.
Now, each of these matters, they are decided on their standalone basis. The ones that we have actually seen that came out from the Supreme Court today is the one that I'm actually making reference to. The one you mentioned, actually, if at the level of tribunal, the case has actually been fractured. If what was carried out by the INEC is such that any right-thinking individual, any reasonable man, will look at it, is going to say this error is so open such that the opposing counsel, they have no particular defense to it, then you are going to be having issues. So at the level of Court of Appeal, they are going to support some of those evidences that were actually given. But in this stance, in this particular one that came out of Supreme Court today, I'm of the view that as far as Gombe, KB, Nasarawa, Kaduna, Delta, as well as Kaduna, have actually been decided by Supreme Court, I want to believe that they have done their good work at the level of the tribunal. If there are infractions that were actually done at the level of the tribunal, just the same way we have it last week, we might not be having it that way. So each of these cases, they are standalone, they are decided on their merits. So I feel that Supreme Court, in their wisdom, they are going to evaluate some of these things as they actually go. Don't forget that Supreme Court, being when we look at, we are saying we have an issue of corruption in Nigeria. There's no doubt about that. I mean, cross-board, including judiciary. But I must make bold to say here that Supreme Court still remain the hallowed chamber where you tend to have sanity across board among all the courts of records in Nigeria. This I can say without any fear of contradictions.
Let's also explore some things we've seen, because we read these stories, and of course we see these cases, and when you see some of the pleas, and you're wondering, so do you think that some political parties just have, I don't know what to call it, maybe some extensive optimism that things can change along the line? So somebody will be contesting or disputing an election where the person comes maybe a distant third, literally, and sometimes the Supreme Court decides and says, this is almost vexatious. Why are you here? And gives them that body language, because whatever happens here is like you want us to give you the vote or the election based on technicality. Does that call for us to look at our laws on how to manage some of these technicalities so that before it gets to the apex court, we're talking about votes and votes and votes and votes alone, not just technicalities?
Now, let me make it abundantly clear at this level. Nigerian politicians, they are more religious than, the religious men. They tend to believe in what, is glaring, what everybody could see. Even at this level of Supreme Court, having seen some of those things, Nigerian politicians will still say, this is what can still be done. So it is quite challenging. Then the lawyers too, have actually conducted a number of electoral matters, in which if such briefs are brought to my office, what I make them to realize is that by yourself, look at the position of the law. Look at what has happened. Lawyers are not bound, they are not duty bound to take every briefs. Most times they are supposed to advise their clients that, premised on the number of witnesses that you have had, as well as the number of exhibits that you want to present, I do not think that if you approach tribunal, this is actually going to, but in all of this, it's still within their right, constitutionally speaking, the right of appeal from the tribunal to the court of appeal. Some of them might want to exploit.
All right, Mr. Akinshola, one more question. I don't know, just a quick one on this one. Maybe if you can do this in 1 minute or 30 seconds. How has all of this strengthened our electoral jurisprudence in your view? You're a lecturer, you're the one that teaches us the law.
Oh, yes. So, you see, in all of this, the position of the law is still remain the same until it is controverted. The provision of Section 1, subsection 3 made us to realize that Constitution is supreme. If Constitution has said that they are going to go to tribunal, from that level, they go to Court of Appeal, they go to Supreme Court. We still have to follow that to letter, and that is what we are doing as far as jurisprudence is concerned.
I must thank you so much for bringing your insights on these particular issues. The cases are not over. In fact, as we speak, some of the cases that have been decided by quote-unquote the big parties are over, but some other parties are also trying to see what can come out of the Supreme Court. But I must thank you for coming on the program, Mr. Kayode Akinshola, legal practitioner, lecturer of law from the Doctor of Law, rather, Chrisland University at Abeokuta. Thank you so much for coming on the program, Doctor.
Thank you for having me. I'm grateful.
Absolutely. So, as I said to my guests, we're still following up on whatever is breaking at the Supreme Court. It doesn't matter the party that is taking whoever to court. We'll bring it live here on the program. But let's move on now and tell you that the national chairman of the Labour Party, Mr. Julius Abure, has dismissed the rumors of a purported arrest. Speaking to Channels Television, Mr. Abure wondered how he would have met with officials of INEC and at the same time presided over the National Working Committee meeting of the party for its Edo State governorship election. But he also explains that and maintains that no party or the party has no pact with the Edo State Deputy Governor, Mr. Philip Shaibu, who is contesting the PDP ticket for the governorship election this year.
It is usually the annual ritual of INEC as part of their constitutional responsibility to carry out verification exercise in political parties. The intention is to ensure that parties are compliant with the Constitution, there is compliance with the Electoral Act, and even with the constitution of the party itself. And so for INEC to be able to do this, they have to visit the party and carry out verification exercise. And so that was exactly what they came to carry out in the office on Tuesday. And the records are very clear. All Nigerians have seen that under my leadership, Labour Party have done exceedingly well. Well, the party is open to all Nigerians who wishes to be members of the party, who can drive their aspiration in the party. But I want to say clearly that as at now, we are not in talk with the Deputy Governor of Edo State, though he's our friend, but that is not to say that we are in talk. It is not to my knowledge that he's making moves to join the party. But like I said, every political party is open to all Nigerians, and the Deputy Governor is a Nigerian, and therefore very free to associate. There's freedom of association, so he has freedom to join any political party of his choice and pursue his aspirations. But nothing is concretized yet.
Now, ahead of the February 3rd rerun election in Lavon Federal Constituency of Niger State, the resident electoral commissioner, Mr. Ahmed Garki, says over 19,000 registered voters are expected to take part in the election across 32 polling units. You can recall that the candidate of the APC, Jibrin Ndagi, had challenged the election of the PDP candidate, Mr. Yusuf Daban, at the Election Petition Tribunal. The appeal court on November the 24th, 2023, upheld the judgment of the tribunal directing a rerun in 9 registration areas across 32 polling units in the constituency.
As a result of court judgment, the court ordered that INEC should conduct a rerun election in Lavun, and the election will take place in 9 registration areas, 32 polling units. And the registered voters in these 32 polling units are 19,121. PVC collected in the 32 polling units are 18,877. So what I'm expected from the electorate that will go for this February 3rd rerun election, I urge them to behave in a civil manner within the ambit of the law. INEC, on our own part, we are going to provide adequate security by the grace of God, and by providing adequate security, that will enable us to have a seamless, peace, transparent, and acceptable rerun election. And the winner will be declared by the grace of God, where even the loser will congratulate the winner.
By the cooperation we always have from INEC and all political parties, based on the record of the other election or previous election, that was 2023 general election, we had a peaceful election, very free from rancor, violence, and bloodshed. And I think Lavun supplementary election will never be an exception. It's going to be free, fair, and credible.
Let's head back to the courts where the legal battle of the former Central Bank Governor, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, to clear his name, continues at the FCTI court today, where he had pleaded not guilty to the 20-count amended charge leveled against him by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. The charges against Mr. Emefiele now includes alleged criminal breach of trust, conspiracy to commit forgery, procurement fraud, and alleged conspiracy to commit felony. The former CBN governor, who is on bail, was granted leave by Justice Hamza Muazu of the FCTI court to travel out of the FCT, but not out of Nigeria. Counsel for the prosecution, Mr. Rotimi Oyedepo, did not object to his continued detention. While granting the request for bail, the trial judge, Justice Muazu, adjourned the case to February the 12th and 13th for continuation of trial. But the former CBN governor can move outside the FCT but must stay in country. While the EFCC has approached the Court of Appeal to set aside a no-case ruling granted former Niger State Governor Dr. Muazu Aliyu and former Chairman PDP in Niger State, Mr. Tanko Beji, by Justice Abdullahi Mukailu of the Niger State High Court sitting in Minna on December the 7th, 2023. In a statement by the EFCC, Head Media and Publicity, the Commission had filed a 7-count charge bordering on conspiracy, abetment, and criminal breach of trust before Justice Aliyu Maikai, who is now retired, against Dr. Aliyu, Mr. Beji, and a former Commissioner for Environment and Chief of Staff to Dr. Muazzez Aliyu, Mr. Mohammed Nasco. The matter was later reassigned to Justice Abdullahi Maikalu, and the EFCC called 11 witnesses and tendered over 400 exhibits and closed its case. However, the 3 defendants made a no-case submission before the court. That's on December 7, 2023, which was granted in favor of Dr. Aliyu and Mr. Beji, and directed Nasco to open his defense. Dissatisfied with the ruling on Dr. Aliyu and Mr. Beji regarding the no-case submission, the EFCC persuaded that the prima facie case had been established against them and filed a notice of appeal dated January 10, 2024 at the Court of Appeal. Let's move on now to other stories where the federal government has inaugurated a special reform tax scheme that will create a required environment or framework, as well as provide recommendations that are needed to actualize a renewed hope agenda for housing and urban development in the country. The Minister of Housing and Urban Development, Mr. Ahmed Dangiwa, who inaugurated the tax scheme in Abuja, says they were inaugurated to assist the federal government establish what he considers a vibrant as well as functional and efficient housing industry that not only meets the shelter needs of Nigerians, but also that can unlock the massive potential in the housing sector.
Over the last 60 years of Nigeria's independence, we have witnessed successive governments roll out a series of housing development plans and policies. Despite these many plans, our country has sadly failed to meet the housing needs of Nigerians as we still grapple with a huge housing deficit. Housing sector contribution to the gross domestic product, GDP, hasn't moved in any significant way over the past several decades. Housing development institutions are also still not only functional at suboptimal capacities, and the enabling housing laws are obsolete. The Housing Institution Reform Task Team comprises housing industry stakeholders, sector experts, stakeholders, agency representatives, professional bodies, and academia. The reforms and legislative amendments that the reform team will carry out in collaboration with the stakeholders at the National Assembly will be one of the most comprehensive set ever done in the history of housing and urban development in Nigeria.
Oh, we can tell you that those 6 governors are now safe to continue with their responsibility. Ogun, Delta, Nasarawa, Kebbi, Kaduna, and Gombe State. Those are the biggest stories from the Supreme Court that we told you. The Supreme Court has affirmed their elections as governor, but the PDP members, our supporters rather, are protesting over that judgment from the Supreme Court concerning the case from Nasarawa State. That is a development story we're following in Nasarawa State. But that's it on the program. Thank you so much for your time and, of course, your usual company. We'll come back again next week for another episode of the program. I'm Jeffrey Uzama. You've been served on Lunchtime.